through. Here we go.
getting you wet.
Are we allowed in this one? I'm up here.
Don't get in the picture.
Why not? I am.
That was a total workout.
Got the right stuff?
We're rolling. Go ahead.
All right. Hi. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Hope you are.
I am well. Can you tell me your name and the group you're with today?
Well, I'm Toby Gordon, and there's actually several groups that are associated with this project. One is Forsyth County Audubon in Winston-Salem. The other is the Hawk Migration Association of North America, which collects observations from about 200 sites throughout North America of migrating birds of prey. And then Pilot Mountain State Park, which has kind of adopted this project and made it official part of their education mission.
And so what are you doing here today?
We are watching migrating birds of prey, about a dozen different species in our area here. And they're coming down the Appalachian Mountains from Canada and the northern US. And while each species has a different destination, some of them will go as far as Central America and down into South America as well.
And what are your favorite things to see when you're up here?
Well, it's fun to see a large number of broadwing hawks. They're the only...
Let's stop. Good. We're rolling.
All right. So can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing here today?
Sure. So Alan and James and I are watching migrating birds of prey. And many of these birds are coming from Canada or northern US. They're following the Appalachians. When the winds are favorable, they can kind of get a free ride, buffeting the updrafts that are created when the winds are out of the north. And they're flying to Central and South America.
And so what are your favorite things to see when you're up here?
There are a lot of wonderful things to see. Seeing a group, a kettle of broad-winged hawks, 10 or 50 or 250 in one group, climbing on a thermal so that they can get a free ride further south. That's pretty dramatic to see that. But there are also things like peregrine falcons and bald eagles and ospreys that migrate through. It's all pretty exciting.
And what's special about Pilot Mountain? Okay. And what's so special about Pilot Mountain?
It's a good question. Logically, you would think that these birds would stay on the Blue Ridge Escarpment. I've always wondered why they came 25 miles south to come here. We don't really know why they come over this point, but they do. That's the important thing.
And what's most exciting for you?
It's pretty cool to come up here and see these birds as they travel to South America. And I think I mentioned earlier, there's sort of three different groups that are coordinating this. One is Forsyth County Audubon, which organizes the count. Another is the Hawk Migration Association of North America, which collects observations from all over the continent. And then Pilot Mountain State Park itself, which has adopted this as an official part of their education mission, and they've just done a tremendous job of making sure that the public gets to learn a little bit about what's going on.
And so what do you do with the data afterwards once it's collected?
Yeah, so each day we fill out a daily report form, and each hour we record the weather, the barometric pressure, the direction of the winds, the temperature, relative humidity, and then we write down any birds that we see during that hour. And at the end of the day, all of that data is sent to Humana, again, Hawk Migration Association of North America. And looking at one site, you can't learn a whole lot, but when you combine our information with 200 other sites, they can begin to make inferences about population trends and things like that.
And tell Olivia very briefly, what was observed yesterday? What were the predominant birds that were spotted here?
So the broadwing migration in this area is sort of coming to a close. We didn't expect very much yesterday, but on the board you can see that we had 313 broadwing. That was a complete surprise. We also had 6 bald eagles and 2 peregrine falcons. I think we were all a bit surprised by that too.
Great.
Could you talk about that again, and don't refer to the board if you would? What's happening is when you turn, I'm getting a hit on the mic.
Oh,
That's
okay.
fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
We can take another shot. Of
Yeah, I'm
board.
going to shoot that.
So,
second.
so let me just ask you again. Tell us what was observed yesterday at this spot.
So at this time of year, the broadwing migration is kind of tapering down in our area. But yesterday we saw 313 of them, which was a complete surprise. And we also saw 6 bald eagles and 2 peregrine falcons, which also surprised us.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Awesome.
And then Bob, can we get a shot? Those are not public.
I know, but
Yeah.
I'm saying we're having a problem with the visitors coming in.
You know, that might be a service that you could provide the park.
Okay.
You might talk to one of the rangers about that.
We're talking.
We have another couple group members coming later today after they finish their exam.
Good luck.
Yeah, how did you get into this?
I moved here in 1988, and I met a woman in the flower when I registered as president. And after seeing me up here for a couple of years, she said, and then just the last year.
I seen that you could one day come up.
And you said that it's
Information for birds of prey. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting story too. This used to be a privately owned park, but also like citizens raised the money to buy this private land.
yeah. That's really interesting.
All right, I better record our weather for the time. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I forgot your name. GA. Have you been up a few times?
Phil, no, you're talking.
Yeah, I know. There's so many people that come.
Had a series.
I have seen your name so many places.
Well, I think
Right.
we were on a walk with Jesse. At the Pilot Creek.
And the other one, and the other one showed up.
Because it's a state park. I think Kiptopeke is.
Oh, no, I'm talking about we,
Williamsburg, yeah.
around the college.
Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
no, good. No, I'm with you. You're doing your job.
I haven't been out to get the big kid. And now you gotta
Turkey? Oh, shoot. I'm desperate. Let's see.
He told me.
Oh, he told you.
see how the wings are up like in a V and the
Yeah.
cathedral, and also they tend to rock.
Uh-huh. Really? Okay, so that's how you tell.
You can see them, the coloration on them, the back edge of their wings will be kind of a silver white, or the black vulture will be white on their wings.
Oh, really?
Black. The black vulture.
Those nice leather ones. Yeah, got lots of
Well, you
sunscreen
can
on.
get a, this is a,
Yeah, just yeah, there's a trail.
Until these guys here that can get up, it's probably not. The mandrels come in yesterday. Blades. That's fine. I just didn't see. The blades are supposed to come in. If there's not much going on, I probably won't step off.
Is that going to be much of a job?
Not too bad, but you know how it is. One thing always leads to something else that you wouldn't expect. The impact tool.
That's
So then when you, no wonder when you go, I mean, I turned it, and I didn't even get it loose hard. I take the other knob till I know I can get them. I mean, you know, but I done broke one. But my new one has threaded.
Yeah. And how,
They
like how big are
advertise it
they?
that
Are they like
fact.
quarter
Ours are.
head on there since it's going to vibrate a bunch?
Yeah, well, I can, but I don't know if I want to or not. I plan to do it without it, check and see if I start having a problem with it, get loose. But that Loctite doesn't get it.
Well,
Take it back off.
Yeah, you got to use a light enough grade that you can break them through.
But I'm glad it ain't got to go back to self-tapping. That's just cheap. And that's just really sorry. That might cost more than everyone. It is what it was.
Nice breeze.
On our,
Up to it, but you can't climb up the face of it.
are you counting the?
I'm getting better. You ready?
Usually it shouts something like, holy shit.
No one gets to see what I do.
Yeah, we're really here for the migrating.
When it's good up here though, it can be hectic. Everybody's hollering. Birds, birds. One here, eagle here, kettle coming in. But then it might be 30 minutes of nothing. I didn't want to get them too discouraged. Today might be 6 hours about that.
We're here and ready and shooting, I'm guaranteeing you.
If y'all had been here yesterday afternoon, you could have got some.
We're not even going to look at you, right? Because we don't want to get
Back
it.
away.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
no, really.
Okay.
We don't
Here we
want
go.
to.
Everybody, please stand by, and we're rolling anytime.
So I guess just start by introducing yourself, like spelling your name, and then your 2 positions, one at Wake Forest, and then also your private sector.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Max Messenger. It's MaxMessinger. And I am the director of the Unmanned Systems program at Wake Forest University. And I also own and run a company called Lynn Aerospace that specializes in building custom drones for various science and engineering applications, and also some service work.
Could you spell the name of your company again?
Yeah,
Ryan?
LINN Aerospace. Yeah.
So I guess to start out, just in general, what is your background with drones, and how does that relate to your work you're doing here?
So my work with drones started in roughly 2011. We got our first drone at Wake Forest. Back then we were really interested in flowering and fruiting patterns in the Andes of Peru, which is where the biology lab that I work with, where their work is focused. And so that's how we got started. And really from there it just sort of snowballed. We got more drones, various types of drones, looking at all sorts of different things. And our first partnership with the state park here was in 2014, after they had a prescribed burn that jumped the line and burned a significant portion of the park. And we flew then to assess the damage that was done by that, or really the changes that occurred. It wasn't really damage. So then we've had a pretty good relationship with the state park since then. We've helped them on other prescribed burns, and then a couple years ago we started this project looking at the deer populations in the park and what effects they have on the other wildlife and vegetation here.
I guess if we want to just go into that, your research with the deer here, how did that start? Did the park contact you, or were you already doing research with that?
That is actually a good question. I don't know for sure whether they asked us to do it or not. But really, the way the work here got started was we started with a more traditional survey of deer populations using camera traps, which is sort of the standard method. And once that was up and running, we thought, hey, it would be really interesting to see if this new method of using drones would be effective, and how it compares to that. So there's a pretty long history of using manned aircraft for thermal imagery surveys of deer and other wildlife, but very, very few cases where drones have been used to do that. So we wanted to do that and compare it to some established methods.
Just briefly, could you describe how a camera trap works for those who don't know?
Yeah, so what a camera trap is a box that we pretty much mount on a tree, and it's got 3 major components. It's got a camera, a motion detector, and an infrared illuminator. So the infrared illuminator creates light that is not visible to us, it's not visible to the animals, but it is visible to the camera. So this camera works day and night, and basically when a large enough animal walks in front of it, it triggers the camera because it triggers the motion detector.
And then how are drones better than a manned aircraft or a camera trap for detecting these type of things?
I really hesitate to say that drones are better at much of anything because they come with their own set of challenges. But there are cases where they make a lot more sense than the established method. So manned aircraft are very reliable. They give us an excellent estimate of what's out there. They solve a lot of the problems with older survey techniques like driving down a road with a spotlight. But they're very expensive. And so drones offer a similar capability. They don't have the ability to cover the vast area that, say, a manned helicopter can, but they can still cover a pretty large area, and they're, you know, orders of magnitude less expensive to operate than a manned aircraft. And the camera traps, it's really still being established how accurate they are, but they require quite a bit of labor to set them, to maintain them, and to analyze the data from them.
And then I know when we talked last, you were talking about how some of those other reports, especially the roadside reports, can be kind of biased in how you're working to test drones, and you think they may be more, I don't know what the right word is, like fair and accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you could speak a little to that and how they're helping with that issue.
Yeah. Traditional methods to survey deer are really driving down a road with a spotlight, and it's not a coincidence that you often see deer when you're driving down the road. It's because deer preferentially use edge habitats, so they like the mowed grass and low vegetation at the side of the road. It's good for them foraging. So the estimate you get driving down the road does not represent reality. It represents how deer use that specific type of habitat. And what drones allow us to do is to get a random sample of the landscape, whereas driving down a road is very much non-random. So we can fly straight lines across the landscape that cross fields, pine forest, deciduous forest, roads, all sorts of different things, and collect all of that in one random sample.
Step forward just a teeny bit, not much. Perfect.
Is that good?
You good?
We're good.
So what is the mission of your project with the state parks here?
The goal that we have is really to help the state parks in managing the resources that they have been that are entrusted to them, the land here. So the state parks do a great job of managing it, but in a lot of cases they don't have all the resources they would like to have to do so. And so our partnership allows us to bring resources that we have, so we have funding to help educate students and conduct research and do things like that. And so we can sort of couple those resources with their mission, which is to understand how the deer affect the park. So that's really what we're helping them with, is to understand how the deer population affects the park, and whether they're overpopulated, whether it's detrimental to the park, and if so, what to do about it.
What have you found out so far about their effect on the park, the deer?
Let's see, I don't know that, well, I'll say what I know I can say. So we don't yet have a solid estimate of the number of deer in the park that we've gotten from the drone data. That's in the final stages of analysis right now. But what we do know, sort of qualitatively walking around the park, is that there's probably quite a few more deer here than would be present in a healthy population. So you can see that in a number of ways. There's very little green vegetation below about 6 feet because the deer have eaten most of it. And also, if you see the deer here, They look much like the deer that you see in urban areas. They're sort of malnourished and very thin, and that's because there's too many of them, and they've got a finite amount of resources, and they're really competing right on the edge for those resources.
And I was wondering, I know this is,
Let's wait. Okay.
Don't worry, I have great ways to explain how LiDAR works, so you can ask me that.
Hey, and Bob,
Yeah.
that tree's not coming out of his head, is it?
It's coming off to the side.
Okay.
Go to your right just a teeny bit, not much. Yeah. All I see is black and white. It's just a bunch of trees. All right.
All right.
Rolling.
so just like a quick thing before we get into the thermal imaging, I was just wondering if you could briefly explain how, I know maybe this isn't your direct source, but the park has been talking to you about how like specifically they want to replant and reintroduce more plants. So I was wondering if you could speak to what they're doing with that and what their goal is.
Yeah. The state parks have a decent idea of the vegetation that's historically been in them through various primary sources. And so one of their goals is to maintain parks or maintain them in that state, or if they're not currently in that state, restore them to it. And so there's a few plants, mostly herbaceous plants, sort of low, non-woody things, that they know used to be here in the park and they know are not here currently. And so there's probably many reasons for that. Deer are one of those reasons. If you have an overpopulation of deer, they will preferentially eat herbaceous things before they eat woody things. So they have to understand how many deer are here, what the density is, before they can reintroduce those plants to ensure that that reintroduction is successful.
And then going into thermal imaging, but in, I guess, layman's terms, I guess sort of explain the data that you get and then how you're using that and what you're looking for. I know you're talking about the white heat spots and that sort of thing, so just whatever you think about that.
So we use what's called a thermal imaging camera, which basically sees heat coming off of an object. So heat is emitted as actually light energy. It's just light that we can't see. And this is a special type of camera that's able to see that light that is heat. It's the same way when you're sitting near a fire, you can feel the heat off of it. That's the light energy coming from it that's warming you up. So the camera sees that, and from that we're able to identify warm bodies against a cold background. So that's why we fly during the winter when it's cold out, because the deer have their temperature is very different from the background temperature during those times, and it allows us to discern or differentiate them from the background.
And then I guess if you guys don't have any more questions, I just have one final question. Is that okay? So I guess, what are you excited about for the future of drones and new technology? Is there anything you're looking forward to, or anything you think is going to change, or anything like that?
One of the big things I'm excited about with drones is just being allowed to use them in more complex ways. So right now we have to keep the drone close to us, and we have a number of parameters we have to operate inside of. And those are slowly being loosened, those restrictions. And as they are, will really allow drones to do what drones were designed to do. Drones initially were not envisioned as a thing that's sort of an extension of a person doing something under manual control. They're really things that go out and they fly themselves, and they require minimal oversight and intervention, and we're sort of working our way towards that future where drones are really allowed to be drones and do what they're capable of.
Sorry, just one more question. Can I ask one more question?
You're gonna have to wait.
Oh, right.
Here we go. Anytime.
So just going off of that, I know a lot of people have concerns about privacy issues and other sort of just mostly privacy issues, I guess, with drones in the future. Is there anything you think about that? Or are you mostly concerned with research with drones, not an overhead government watchdog thing?
I do think a fair amount about policy as it pertains to drones, because it influences how we use them, and there definitely are legitimate privacy concerns surrounding them. But I think a lot of the fear of drones arises from a misunderstanding of drones. So the biggest things are that they're not as capable as people think they are. They can't fly for a really long time. They can't, the telephoto lens, the zoom lens on a nice camera is much, much more powerful than the zoom lens on a drone. So they can't see much detail from very far away, and they're also not very quiet. If one were flying over us right now, it would be no secret. They're very easy to hear. So they're I think a lot of the fear is just not knowing what drones are capable of and assuming that they have this sort of military capability, which in reality they in general do not.
And then just last question, is there anything that's really surprised you in your research that you found with this? Or like the most interesting thing?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's been, what was that?
Is it a deer?
Oh, it's just a big squirrel.
That scared me.
Yeah. So here in the state park, it's been really interesting to see the deer population and really see that there's potentially even more than we thought were here. There's a really high density of animals here. And then we've also done similar studies at other sites nearby. So it has been really striking to see the difference between a state park and a hunting preserve and a county or city park, and sort of the differences between different land management strategies, different goals, gives rise to really different unintended outcomes.
I think
And what's most surprising about what you found right here at Pilot Mountain State Park?
Yeah, so here at Pilot Mountain, there's a lot of deer. They are kind of all over the place. They use all parts of the park, which really indicates to us that there is an overabundance of them, because there are marginal habitats, places with not very good food supplies, and there's still deer there at still pretty high densities. And that's because they have nowhere else to go. They get pushed out of the better places to be. So it's been interesting to see that.
And then is there anything else I didn't ask that you wanted to add or anything like that?
I don't think so. I think I'm good yeah. Nothing comes to mind
Awesome.
immediately. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank
Woo.
you. Okay, anytime.
Okay.
Hang on, brakes there. Okay, go. Do me a favor. This prop right here. Just close it and open it up. E, hang on. Go. All right, set it back down.
Okay.
Then do your thing. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, it's
Ready?
fine.
Go. Hang on a second. Let me get that close up.
Okay.
Ready? Go. Test that one more time.
Yep.
Go.
All right. That way it's kind of in the shade. All right.
Set those down one more time, right there, right there. And go.
Okay.
Hang on one second. You're gonna turn
Welcome
things
to Free Sky Tyrannus.
Okay.
You
I'd
wanna
like
go-
to get that audio,
Yep.
yeah. If you don't mind. All right. Take your hand away.
Yep.
Sorry. Just bossy. And go.
Welcome to Free Sky Tyrannus. Throttle warning.
Mode change to alt hold.
Oh, it's so hot.
Bad gyro health.
A flight plan now. Maybe.
If you could like talk us through what you're doing, that might be cool.
Okay. Yeah, so I've connected to the aircraft now. It's powered up and ready to fly. I'm just finding our flight plan now. And there it is. And that will load up on our map. So this is 3 parallel transects that covers the southern half of the park, basically. And then we'll, the northern half, we fly from the other side of the parking lot. So.
And Max, tell us, as you're doing this,
Telemetry lost. Telemetry recovered.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Good. And so when we do this flight, we'll do this flight, we'll be covering about 20% of the southern half of the park, which is a big enough sample that it lets us extrapolate how many deer are in the entire park. So we'll be flying over this area at about 400 feet above the ground, and then analyzing the video to find any deer that are in there. Okay.
Mode change to loiter. Heading to waypoint 1. Mode change to auto. Arm.
Is that probably
Heading to waypoint 2.
there it goes.
I take it this is an official flight.
It is.
Okay. I didn't see the operator and I didn't know where it was coming from. Just had two broad wings up in this big cloud just streamed out.
Hmm.
Cool. Well, we've had nothing, so y'all done good to leave when you did. I mean, barely nothing.
How does that look
Great.
for you? Okay, it always looks smaller in the camera, so that's,
Yeah,
if you want me to fly closer, I can.
I think that's good.
Okay.
The light's just killing me. It's dark there. And
Yeah, if you want me to fly like below that cloud layer,
yeah, try that. Let's just see.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's going to work.
Could you possibly stand like right here to block the sun? Scoot a little bit closer to Trent. No, that way. Yeah, that's good.
If you'd stand right there. Yeah, come right there.
Yep.
Thank you. There you go. I got you in the drone. Outside of the monitor, so the screen is smaller than the monitor rather than just the picture.
Oh yeah.
Good.
can, if you want to get me at the computer, I don't know.
I will eventually.
Okay.
I'm going to get you flying right now.
Do you want me to go ahead and take off again?
If you want to.
It's up, yeah. I mean, if you're just getting footage of me holding the controller, I can just stand here, look in the sky.
All right, sir.
Okay. And I'm actually going to land real quick because I forgot. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Stand by. Watch out, guys. Heads up.
Heads up.
Sun's back out. It's right out there. It's coming from the left to the right. Got it? Okay.
Telemetry lost.
You're rolling, sir. And turn off phones, please.
In the light when you,
Phones off.
Yeah, yeah,
Everyone
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
steady.
yeah, I'm doing my best here. I'm really tall, so.
I think you have everything that would beep or make noise off.
We're rolling.
All right, so if you could give me your name and spell it, and then tell me your title.
My name is Matt Windsor, Windsor, and I'm the park superintendent at Pilot Mountain State Park.
All right, how long have you been the superintendent?
I've been here for 10 years, since '08, and I worked for 10 years before that at various parks across the state.
So can you tell me a little bit how this this drone project got started at the park?
So Wake Forest contacted us after we had prescribed fire in 2012 that they wanted to fly and study, and they had some different research interests, and they were also interested in doing more research close to Wake Forest University as opposed to in other countries. So that started our partnership with them. Initially they flew high resolution images of the tree canopy for us so we could study long-term change of the forest. And then we also had an interest in what the effects of white-tailed deer are on the forest at Pilot Mountain. And so that's morphed into a couple different research areas that drones have been real helpful with because they allow us to put a small vehicle somewhere above the deer population where we're not going to alert the deer. It's a more accurate way to survey deer than driving along and you're looking out the window and saying, yeah, we got some here, we got some here.
Yeah, so so the deer overpopulation, can you speak a little bit about, you know, has that been a problem at the park, or you know, what are you looking for when with this drone survey?
So as from the public's perspective, probably, you know, people like to see deer. You know, there's things that a wildlife biologist would call a social carrying capacity. You might not want to see deer in your yard, eating your vegetable garden, but you come to a park, you like to see them. So we're not, you know, we're charged with managing the natural resources first, and there is an effect on the natural resources from having too many deer and also having deer that are habituated. So deer that have lost their fear of predators and will stand in one place and graze instead of moving and grazing, which is what they're naturally adapted to do. So you see that behavior in a park, even with a low deer population. You'll see deer that have an effect on the park because of their tendency just to stand in one place and graze. Lots of times that can result in visitors doing things like trying to feed the deer, trying to get the deer to pose for pictures and things like that. That's been an issue in parks. And that's not good for the deer. It's not good for the visitor because it brings them in contact with a wild animal, and it can kind of lead you to a false sense of security because these animals aren't defenseless, and you don't want to alter their behavior where they're going to see people as a source of food.
Yeah, so when
Sorry, I'm bull gazing, looking at the ring.
all right. So oh yeah, you're good. Get in front of everything. Can you talk about a little bit what your plans are when you get the survey information of how many deer, or an estimate of how many deer are on the park?
So Wake Forest is still refining the numbers from combining a camera count, which is, there's been a digital camera counting deer basically 24 hours a day for over 2 years, refining the numbers that they get from that plus the drone survey. And that will give us an accurate amount of deer per acre. That's something that wildlife managers look at as far as what the effect of deer is on the forest. And no forest is the same. So it's not really valid to compare this forest to a forest in the coastal plain or the lower Piedmont or even along a river corridor. This is a very dry, acidic, nutrient-poor forest. So it's likely that it can't support a level of deer that would be considered acceptable somewhere else. A lot of deer research has been done in the Northeast, specifically because of the higher incidences of Lyme disease up there. That is a consideration in North Carolina now. Wake Forest Baptist is studying Lyme disease as it moves in North Carolina. UNCG is also doing tick research related to tick-borne diseases. So there's a lot of interest in, you know, what's
the right number of deer per acre at Pilot Mountain, we don't know that yet. But I think we'll be well on our way once we get this data. Another thing that Wake Forest wants to do is study the nutritional forage of what the deer are eating here. Like I mentioned, this is a dry acid mountain. It has a particular type of plant community that you don't find even just driving outside the front gate. So more similar to something that you might see in a kind of a sandy coastal plain habitat where there's just not that many nutrients, so the forage is not going to have that many nutrients. And what deer do is they preferentially browse the best stuff. So at this point, all the good stuff has been eaten. We do have some historical records of plants that can't be located in the park anymore. That can't solely be attributed to deer. It's probably also due to decades of fire suppression. Those were plants that liked sunshine. And when you get a closed canopy forest, you lose that diversity on the forest floor. So you get kind of a 1-2 punch. You get the deer eating the things like blueberries that are, kind of a high benefit to wildlife. And then there's nothing that can grow back because it's in total shade. So we've got a lot of work to do. We hope we'll have a good number, hopefully by this time next year, of how many deer per acre would be more appropriate for Pilot Mountain. We're also working with the Wildlife Commission. They've done a couple herd health checks here, and they send a lot of data off to the University of Georgia, where they actually establish a nutritional carrying capacity of the land that the deer are on. So they're studying what's growing on the outside of the deer and living on the inside of the deer. There's a lot of parasites living in deer that are under stress, and the deer here are definitely under stress.
All right, yeah, so you talked about some of the plants that are kind of extinct in the park. Max and a couple other people have mentioned how you might want to reintroduce some of them once you've got an idea of the deer population. Maybe you can get them under control. So can you maybe tell us what those plants are and what your plans are on reintroducing?
Sure. Some of these are, one is federally endangered, it's Schweinetz's sunflower, and it was a Piedmont prairie species that used to be found when the Piedmont was kind of more like oak savanna and had lots of open areas than it does today. It's really suffered because of fire suppression and also just the landscape changing. If you were to fly over in your drone or your plane right now over forests in this part of North Carolina, you see a lot of closed canopy forests and you see a lot of green lawns. And that's not good habitat for Schweinetz's sunflower or a lot of our rare species which were adapted to fire and sunlight and some kind of disturbance. So Schweinetz's sunflower is being reintroduced hopefully next year. Surrey Community College is actually growing it for us right now in their greenhouse, partnership we have with them, from seed that we got collected from a wild population that's just outside the park. It's going to be reintroduced, and we'll be actually fencing it. So it's going to look kind of, there's a lot of intervening going on, but we can't put a federally endangered species out there and let it just be gobbled up like deer candy. So we'll be fencing it in until it can establish itself. And this was a plant that lived in Piedmont when we had elk roaming around Pilot Mountain. So big grazing animals that would have kept the habitat more open along with a lot of fire. Some of the more common ones, which you can still find outside the park, but you can't find inside the park anymore, are New Jersey tea. It's not really rare, but it's just a pretty attractive shrub that grows in open pine woods and open oak woods. It's right outside the park. It's not located in the park anymore. Turkey beard, which is a uncommon lily, Carolina lily, both of those are gone. We haven't been able to locate them in many years, and they were on historical surveys, and park staff was finding them even up into the 60s and 70s, but we're not locating them now. So those are just a couple that we hope will be able to rebound. Some of them should still have seed in the seed bank. If we can continue doing prescribed burning and we can reduce the deer effect on them, they should be able to come back in. And like I said, some of these plants are right outside the boundary. They're just not in the park anymore.
Yeah, so when you say reducing the deer effect, what are some of the management options for kind of managing how many deer on the park?
So right now, hunting in state parks is not a management option. It's not in our regulations to allow hunting. The only option that's been used in parks is removal, which is basically a culling. There were deer that were removed from Moore Mountain State Park several years ago and shipped to the Cherokee Nation in southwest North Carolina to bolster their deer population, which was low there. There are some places in North Carolina that have a low deer population, just either due to the forest composition or, you know, other factors. So they wanted deer. The park there had a plethora of deer, had plenty. So they did actually move around 100 deer to the Cherokee Nation. The only other option is to do some sort of culling. We haven't done that here. We have done some herd health checks with the Wildlife Commission, which that involves taking 5 to 6 deer and then processing them. The meat is given to Hunters for the Hungry, and all the biological material, basically the stuff inside the deer, its organs and the parasites living in it, are sent to the University of Georgia. So that's the only removal of deer that's been done here. We haven't done anything on a scale like what was done at Moore Mountain. But there are other natural resource agencies around us that are already doing this, either through bow hunting or removal. You know, just Charlotte Meck Parks do it, Duke Forest does it, Nature Conservancy does it. So we wouldn't be alone in exploring something like that once we get some more data.
Yeah, absolutely. One second. The sun is directly in my eyeball.
You would turn that lamp around to you. You won't see the sun.
On you. Put your hat down. See if that works.
Yeah.
Might help a little.
Whenever you're done, I have a question.
Okay, cool. So, is there? Would you say there's a that the drones have? Okay, let me kind of rephrase this question. Would you say that do you think that the drones are a better way of surveying the deer population as opposed to using like camera traps?
Well, the camera traps provide a different aspect than the drone does. The drone is kind of ground truthing what you can see in the camera traps. If you have all of the mountain canvassed by a drone with a radar on it, that's mine. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought it was.
I thought it was an animal.
Just a bee about to attack me. The drone can fly the mountain all at once.
Let
And-
finish his.
But it's very, yeah, let's,
Yeah, we can start that one.
Yeah, yeah.
sorry.
No.
I thought I had it silenced all the way. Evidently, silent doesn't mean silent anymore.
Yeah.
We have no control over our mobile devices.
I thought I did.
Yeah, I
I
have the
know.
same problem with my phone. Siri talks to me when I don't know what it is.
Exactly. Time to get
If I have all the other little, okay. I can just turn it off. Probably if I turn this thing off, satellites will just fall from the ground.
That's what I'm thinking.
You have to readjust that. 1 second, Bob. I think the lighting dropped down a little bit.
Can I just loosen this and bring it up a little?
Oh, drop down. I thought you meant.
It dropped.
No, it didn't fall.
It slipped.
Good. We're rolling.
All right. Let's just start that one right back over. Yeah. So you were talking about how the drones benefit the camera traps and kind of give them a new perspective.
You know, you could obviously look at the data showing up on a camera trap and you could say, well, you could see where some areas might draw more deer than others. The drone, the benefit of that is that you're surveying everything all at once at the same time. You know, there's no chance that someone could have done something to influence it. You're capturing all the image at once, and you're doing it in a way that would not be possible if you were to fly the canopy with a helicopter with a FLIR. That noise is obviously going to scatter the deer and disturb it. They don't know that the drone is there. It's flying it high enough and it's quiet enough that they can observe without disturbing. So I doubt that they're disturbed by the camera traps, but the main reason for doing the camera trapping and drone versus just doing a drive-by deer survey is that, you know, we had brought the question up in the past, you know, saying we had a lot of deer here, and people said, well, you don't really have that many. I mean, look how many do you see from the road? So you can't just survey by going by the road. You know, the road sometimes at some parks is drawing the deer to the road because it's good deer habitat. It's an edge. Deer like the edge. Some parks, the deer habitat is probably not going to be on the road. You know, here it's mostly closed canopy along the road. So there's probably not going to be more deer drawn to the road than there would be found out in the middle of the forest with the drone.
Cool. Yeah. What is the value of Pilot Mountain? Why do you and visitors care about this place?
So, good question. you know, Pilot Mountain is a mountain that you can see and not see. If you've grown up around it, sometimes you might be so used to seeing it that it becomes just a part of the landscape that you see every day. But visitors from across the world and across the country, when they see this mountain, they are wowed. So yeah, I have an appreciation, having grown up near here and having visited this park, that was enhanced when I moved away and came back, you know, when I kind of see it again for the first time. So it's something that's a national geological and biological resource, and that's what's really important to us to protect. And it's not just for recreation. Recreation is important. It's important for people to be able to enjoy it. But, you know, the bottom line is that we're charged with stewarding these areas for not just for our kids, but for their kids and their kids. So we have to engage in active management to make sure that we're kind of doing our best to kind of fix mistakes that were made in the past, you know, past land use. We have the benefit of hindsight now, looking back and saying, well, you know, 50 years ago maybe we should have been doing prescribed burning, or 50 years ago maybe we should have done this or that. We can't go back and change time. We just have to work with what we got now.
Yeah, and I think I just have one more question. Do you think that drones and their usage of how Max and Wake Forest is doing it right now, think they have a good place in helping the park in the future? Are you kind of excited about that?
Absolutely. You know, this is still evolving technology. You know, some drones, as this technology improves, they have the capability to recognize shapes. And if you could differentiate wildlife with a drone, that's another survey in itself. If you could differentiate plants, growing plant communities. You know, if a drone can fly over a marsh and pick out, you know, say rare plants growing in a sea of grass that you'd be doing a survey at ground level, it'd be hard for you to find. It's a tremendous benefit. It's a small contained plane. So anything you can do with an aircraft that, you know, the park system is not overflowing with money. We don't have a budget for aircraft. You can do with a drone. It's obviously a lot more cost effective. It's a lot less invasive than flying a plane or a helicopter over the park to do aerial surveys. So there's a lot of untapped potential for drone use. They've been used in search and rescue, which is a consideration in parks. You know, some of the larger parks where they've had to call in a helicopter with a FLIR, if you've got a drone with a FLIR that can do the same thing, it's a lot easier to deploy than, you know, just picking up the phone and calling in a helicopter. So there's a lot of uses for these things. They're useful tools, just like everything. You know, it's a tool that can be used, and you know, we want to make sure that it's used for research purposes.
Trent, do you want to ask one more question and stop for now? Maybe we can.
No, I think
You're done.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, that was
okay.
my last question.
Oh, that was your last question.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would? Okay. Cool. Is there anything that you would like to talk about that I haven't asked? You know, about this drone project, or?
I guess the thing I've enjoyed the most about it is personally important for me, for parks to be engaged with area universities and be laboratories for learning. I think that's one thing that gets missed a lot with parks. You know, when you hear the Division of Parks and Recreation, it's easy to focus on recreation. Recreation's important, but you know, the bottom line is that we need to understand what's going on in our parks, and we have to be able to partner with area researchers to be able to do that. That gets them engaged in the park, that builds stewardship in the park, and that builds interest in this place for something more than being a tourism attraction.
Great. Thank you.
You'll just stand right. That sound. We're rolling.
All right, we're good to go?
Yeah.
All right, so can you tell us what the purpose of these fenced-in areas are?
Sure. Obviously, you know, if this was around your garden at your house, the deer wouldn't be getting in or out. So that's the purpose, is to exclude the deer, keep the vegetation in and out of their bellies. So this is a long-term study plot, and Wake Forest has installed these across the park. We did have some historical plots that the Carolina Vegetation Survey had set up, They were not fenced in, so they're prone to being overbrowsed. So these will be browse free. Of course, it doesn't keep things like rabbits and voles from scooting in there and doing some grazing, but the big browser, the deer will be excluded. We've had a trail cam on this one off and on, and they come right up to the edge, trying to get in. So over time, this will provide a study plot, and Wake is inventorying the plants that are growing inside the vegetation exclosure. So hopefully in the future we get to see some comparison between inside the exclosure and outside of it. There is some research that says it takes a long time for areas to recover once they've been hit pretty hard by deer for a while. So it could take some time, but these are here essentially forever, other than doing some basic maintenance on them and providing research for Wake students and for the park.
Do you know how, you said it's going to take some time, you know how long that would be?
If it's in an area with a whole lot of sunlight, probably just one season, you're going to see a big difference. Area that's shaded, this is kind of partially in the shade, although it's getting sunnier. It could come back in a few years, but some plants respond differently to browsing than others. So we're hoping there will be some things in the seed bank that were being preferentially browsed by the deer that'll have an opportunity to come back in this area. This is below our kids' tracks trail, so this cage was installed more as kind of an educational exclosure, to be able to show kids while we're taking them on guided hikes and things like that. There are, like I said, they're scattered at random throughout the park, and they're not necessarily in an area as visible as this. This area does get some foot traffic and stuff. People just kind of walking up to check out the cage and that sort of thing. That's fine. That won't affect anything inside the cage, but it would make their foot traffic on the outside look a lot like deer traffic.
All right. Thank you for that. All right.
So it's this kind of a presence-absence thing. I mean, if was there something here that deer don't like? But everything here is something that deer avoid browsing. That creates milk sickness, that wildflower.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously they don't prefer pines, although they'll grass. Grass is harder on them. And then the other things grown in here are like dog fennel. It has a really bad smell to deer. So things that are left are tough, or they are aromatic. There's a lot of like goldenrods and mints and things like that the deer won't touch just because they smell strong to us, and a deer they'd be incredibly powerful, but most of what's here is what deer do not prefer to eat. So a lot of what they're clipping, a lot of the there's not much growing in here, but there's some right there, some of the low bush blueberry and huckleberry. They kind of clip the top of that and they'll eat the berries off of it. That low shrub right there.
Are you still mic'd up?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, he is.
When Bob finishes shooting that, I'd like you to just kind of walk in there and show and tell us what you're pointing to now.
Sure.
That would be interesting.
Now I have a prop. Is that good right here?
We're good, Trent.
All right. Yeah, if you would want to explain how you were explaining that a couple minutes ago.
So this is a pretty dry acid forest, and like I said, a lot of the things that we have here, like...
Hang on a second. Refrain from saying like I said before, because we don't know where that's going to end up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Sorry, we didn't tell you that. Let's wait 1 second. Okay, Trent.
All right, go for it.
So all the plants you can see in front of you here are what would be pretty typical of a dry acid forest in the mountains. And this one is obviously, has quite a few white-tailed deer in it. The rare plants that we have here, like turkey beard, it's absent, not a rare plant, but one that gets browsed by deer. New Jersey tea, it's absent. But we do have a lot of things growing that deer just do not like, and that's why they're here. The preferential browsing means that the deer are eating the tender stuff and they're leaving things like this. This is dog fennel. It smells really strongly, kind of smells like fennel. They don't browse that. There's pines here. They don't really, they did clip the pines when they were seedlings, and you can see the pines at my feet. They didn't, when this is grown, it's the Table Mountain pine, it'll have a kind of bonsai look to it, but they're crooked right now because they've been clipped several times and they send off shoots. So that's their adaptation to being browsed, so they'll survive it. Some of the grasses, deer don't eat a lot of grasses because of the silica content in it. So you can see there's some native grasses here. And then some of the things like mountain laurel at my feet, they only eat certain times of year in the winter. A lot of these things are toxic to some livestock. That flower over there and these ones behind me, the white flowers, are white snakeroot. They cause milk sickness in livestock. So there's a lot of them here. I presume they probably cause the same problems in deer because they don't tend to browse on them. And mountain laurel they only eat in the winter. That's something that would be poisonous to a lot of animals, but deer can tolerate it, but they have to build up a tolerance to it by eating a little bit of it at a time.
Hey Matt, Bob, can you get a close-up of that little pine tree? And
Yeah, I've got to do a lot of close-ups.
Yeah.
Are we through talking?
yeah,
I think that's
but
good.
just have him talk about it, put his hand down so we can intercut between the just talk about it when Bob's ready. So
Sure.
Yeah, anytime.
anytime, so you can grab your left, stand right where you are, don't move.
Okay.
And just start talking about that pine, and as you do so, grab it with your left hand, which is what you did before.
Right, so this is a Table Mountain pine. They're found from North Georgia to southern Pennsylvania, only in the Appalachians, nowhere else. Its adaptation to being browsed by deer, and it's been browsed, is to sprout. That's why it's crooked like this. It ordinarily would be a little straighter. You can see the ones behind me are the same way. They've been clipped off, so deer don't prefer to eat pines, but the seedlings they will because they're hungry. They are kind of clipping the tops of them off. And then this pine right here is about 5-6 years old, so that's pretty small for it. If it wasn't browsed, some of the ones we have in areas that have not been browsed would be about like that by now.
And anytime.
So this is dog fennel. It's a pretty common herb that grows in disturbed areas, and it's very common here, and it's something that is not browsed by deer because it has a very strong smell. If you crush it, it kind of smells like carrots or fennel. You know, a lot of these plants that are surviving being browsed either have some adaptation like spines, thorns, bristles, or a really strong smell, something that doesn't appeal to deer. So they'll eat the more palatable forage first, and something like this would be only eaten in starvation time.
Just hold it. Just put it behind you. I meant on the ground. Go ahead. Pick it up one more time. Sorry. I'm trying to duplicate what you did before.
Yeah, I think you had it in your left hand. You just kind of threw it behind
Yeah, just do
you.
it behind you.
Okay.
Ready, go. Perfect. Thank you. All right. What else do I need?
Berries on it. Migrating monarch. There, and then they work their way back north in the spring. We plant milkweed. We got it from the Fish and Wildlife Service all over the park, and you know we don't plant it up here. Milkweed doesn't.
Oh, no, it's a plane right there. Right through there.
Mhm.
And the fawn came in. was actually right around the enclosure.
Yeah, they get in that time we burn it in the dormant season, and the second time we burn it in the summer. So
You say there's more.
Hey, Trent, let's
Oh,
let's not talk. So
did you say? What's the deer population like?
Okay, Trent.
All right.
So this is one of Wake Forest trail cams that is surveying wildlife 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The obvious advantage of using something like this is that,
Let's start again. You're looking at me, so I'm
oh, sorry. Okay.
Here we go. Anytime.
This is one of Wake Forest trail cams. It's surveying wildlife 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They're manually pulling the data off of it. An advantage to this over spotlighting surveys for deer is that it's capturing the deer without you disturbing it. You know, the deer is not disturbed by the trail cam. Theoretically, a deer could visit more than one camera site. These sites are set up one camera every 100 acres on the mountain, so 22 cameras total. So there's an advantage there for using the drone with a forward-looking infrared radar over a camera, that you could census all the deer population at one time. And you know, once you can get that data, then you could eliminate a deer wandering between two camera sites and being counted multiple times.
Could you just kind of explain how the camera works?
So the camera, during the daytime, it's taking daytime photos. At night, it's triggered by infrared. It'll have... That's what I get for turning my phone back on.
Oh, you're killing me. That was great. That's our outtake for the Christmas.
Yeah, we'll
party.
have a blooper reel.
Okay, I'm powering it back off.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Once
if
you get a
you
bit
feel
closer
more
to it.
comfortable, you know, turning and pointing at it and kind of interacting with it.
Get a little
Okay.
bit-
I feel like
maybe
you gotta.
you even show us where the infrared is coming from.
Get a
All
little
right.
bit closer to it. Slide over a little bit closer to it. There you go. It'll make it easier for you too. And I'll have to have you squat down. a
Okay.
little bit, Sorry.
That's
All
all
I
right.
see is the top of your head.
All right, we're
Okay,
good?
Trent. We're good.
All right. Can you explain how the camera works for us?
So there's a trigger on the front. You know, I just tripped it. Y'all are on video now. And there's an infrared trigger at night that picks up the heat signature of the animal once it gets within a certain range. Most of these cameras have a range out to about 70 feet, depending on the brand. It's taking photos all the time, so it's taking photos without disturbing wildlife, and there's been a lot of neat studies done. North Carolina Museum is doing their e-mammal and candid critters survey now with trail cams all over the state. So they allow you to observe wildlife without disturbing them.
All right. Yeah.
Should we
We
get
got our
the
two.
video?
So I'm going to shoot. And anytime. Perfect. You can stand up if you want. I'm just going to shoot the marks.
Video's concerned, we don't know who Wes is.
The first question.
Yeah.
Like you said, he tripped it, so like we're on
Oh,
camera.
that
So I
was
don't know if
the
that's
second
confusing for the viewer. I don't know. It's probably fine.
Just have the
Just
If you think it means we should pose for a photo for the model cooking.
yes. How do we get the photos of us?
You just re-ask the first question.
Okay. So
Show us how the camera works. Explain it a little bit.
So the camera has a memory card inside it that you have to manually pull. This version, you know, some trail cameras can transmit by cell. It's got a trigger on the front. You can either trigger by movement or infrared at night. At night it's picking up the animal's heat signature or person's heat signature. And you're getting that data without disturbing wildlife. You know, they occasionally will come up and look at the camera, but their behavior is not changed. Whereas if we were out here trying to photograph these animals or spotlighting deer or something like that to try and determine how many we have, we're changing their behavior.
I have a question. On that lock, is that a combination lock?
Yes.
Okay, explain to Trent why it's a combination lock, because the deer can pick it. Is that right? They know the combo?
We have to change it every week once they learn it. And they've actually only had one of these. I mean, these are $500 cameras. They've had one stolen. But
Serious? Really?
most of the
Okay. Okay. Go ahead and start again. My fault, because I'm telling you not to look down. It's my fault. Missed it. Okay. We're rolling at any time.
Okay, and we are rolling. So as we're scrolling through the video, we're looking for any hot spots that show up. And right here in this area, we've got what looks like 4 deer. So from the height that we're flying, they're really just oblong white spots that show up. You can kind of maybe make out that their head is a little bit smaller, but that's about it.
So Max, if we could do that again.
Here we go. And action.
So as we're flying along, we can see a group of deer here come into view. It looks like we've got about 4 individuals in this group. And really they just show up as oblong white spots on the map, maybe a little bit narrower where the head is, but that's what we're looking for, is just hot spots that stand out from the background.
Okay, I'm going to go really tight on it and just go through it one more time with your pen, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And talk?
Mhm.
You the same, okay. And so we're looking for these oblong white spots on the map. So these are 4 individual deer here. They're a little bit smaller where the head is, a little bit narrower, but for the most part, we're just looking for things that stand out from the background.
Drop your pen.
Okay, now don't move the screen at all. And Bob, I was thinking if he keeps it steady, we can really go from the tight now to a wider shot maybe.
I watched Young Frankenstein a few days ago, and there's the whole bit with him changing what side the hump is on. So great.
That was great.
Don't you mean Frankenstein?
Yes, Frankenstein.
All right, we are rolling.
So you just you want me to run the same explanation
Yeah.
from here? Okay.
Yeah, and starting with your pen there when you start talking.
Right. So as we scroll through, we're looking for these white spots that are hotter than the background. So it's just these oblong white spots. So here we've got a group of 4 deer together, and their heads are a little bit narrower than the body, but for the most part they just show up as being hotter than the background. And then once we find them, we can see over here on a map where exactly this is happening, where the drone was, and subsequently where the deer are.
Can you do that one more time? And is this the pinnacle here?
No.
And anytime.
So as we're scrolling along, we're looking for spots like these. We've got these oblong white patches that are deer. So here we've got 4 individual deer in a group together, and we can't really tell it's a deer. Their head is a little bit narrower than their body. It doesn't look like a deer, but it's hotter than the background, which tells us what we're looking at. And then over here on the map, we can see where the drone is as it's flying along, and subsequently we know where the deer are on the ground.
Great.
And action.
And I'll just do the bit about this map, I guess. I mean, I don't need to.
Go from that one to that one. Ready, action.
And if we look over here, we can see the actual footprint of the video. So we can see where the drone is and what it's seeing on the ground. And with that, we can determine where the deer are on the ground.
Big as a deer is kind of it's at the top.
Okay, begin walking. want you to keep walking. My
Okay.
fault. Okay. Look to your left. Okay, look to your right. When I say go, look to your left and go. Far left. Back to the right. Ready, and far left. Do your thing. Just do it a little bit more. We're good. We're up here. Just hold it up. There you go. Perfect.
Sand in and of itself is not really a problem. The problem is that it takes about an hour and a half on the way in and out of the country, so it's just a big waste of time. The way I see it, it's a waste of their time too, because there's no fee. It's a free service. You're giving them a deposit, but they're giving it back to you.
Right.
So you're taking up 3 hours of a customs agent's time for them to get nothing. But that's the way they do it.
They're worried you're going to
Wide angle 4K. It's pretty goofy. antennas are for the.
Finding our flight plan now. There it is, and that will load up on our map. So this is 3 parallel transects that covers the southern half of the park, basically, and then the northern half we fly from the other side of the parking lot.
And Max, tell us, as you're doing this, what are you hoping to find? Well, wait till Bob gets repositioned.
Guys are killing me. Stuff to shoot hand.
And so when we do this flight,
Say it again.
when we do this flight, we'll be covering about 20% of how many deer are in the entire park. So we'll be flying over this area at about 400 feet above the ground, and then analyzing the video to find any deer that are in there.
It's great.
Back and do, fly by the front or something like that.
That would be great.
And you don't have.
Heading to waypoint 2.
That's killing me.
Road change to Hoyer.
So on another
At about
This is an official flight.
it is. How does that look for you? Okay, it always looks smaller in the camera, so that's, if you want me to fly closer, I can. Like below that cloud layer.
You know, it is what it is. It's a little to your left, please. Sorry. A little more. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
you could just see the.
I'm actually going to land real quick. that they waive pretty routinely. They're willing to work with you on that. There's a set of requirements that you have to meet, and if you do, you'll get the waiver. With other things like beyond line of sight, they're pretty much completely unwilling to even entertain that idea. So I think as technology improves, as there's more and more evidence that it can be done safely, it will start to be more of an option here. Overpopulation, you get problems like malnutrition, disease and parasites that are able to go through that population more effectively because they're more dense. And so those are all bad things for the deer themselves. And then they also cause damage to the park itself. So they really change the structure of the forest. And to someone like Jared or I, when we walk into the forest at Pilot Mountain or somewhere like it, it's immediately apparent that there's an overabundance of deer because of the way the forest looks. And so, you know, they've sort of qualitatively known all of this. And what this does is provides them a hard quantitative data about what the density of deer is, because we know what healthy deer populations, what kind of densities we should be seeing. So this gives them a very good quantitative estimate of how many deer are there, so that if they do need to do something like a herd reduction, they know how many deer they need to remove in order to have a healthy herd. And then there's other projects, like right now they're working to do some endangered native plant restorations, so things that they know used to be at Pilot Mountain that are not there anymore. And they know that if they do those introductions now, those plants will be immediately killed by deer. They'll immediately be eaten. So bringing the deer to a healthy herd size will help them, it will help those restorations, and it'll help the forest as a whole.
I was just curious about this, sorry, what plant are you talking about them reintroducing, you know?
What are they talking about? I don't know.
Some variations of Trillium species, and then there's some endangered sunflowers.
Yeah.
There's be natural sunflowers that would grow in the forest.
Yeah, so they're all herbaceous plants. They're not like trees or things like that. They're all sort of herb layer, understory type.
Like what they would graze on and stuff like that?
Right, because when we go to Pilot Mountain, we can look at this, but basically below 5 or 6 feet, there's nothing green in the park. And that's because the deer have eaten all of it. So anything you plant there that's green is going to get eaten. So. Right, there's some that they really don't like, but even the ones that there's a lot of things that they don't really like to eat, but they will eat when they're hungry, and so all of those are even gone from the understory. It's only the things that they really can't eat that are still able to grow. So there's some thorny bush woody bushes that they don't really eat that are up around the summit, and some other stuff. Rhododendron they don't eat, but it may be. I'm not. Is rhododendron poisonous?
It's some species.
Yeah.
The plants or the leaf.
That's cool. I mean, yeah, I'd love to when we're at Pilot Mountain, if you could show us sort of the plants that they've eaten and
Didn't quite get it in time. These 3 spots are likely deer. So you can see, I mean, the video is not super high resolution. It's pretty grainy. But you know, the good thing is that, well, there's 2 good things. One is that at Pilot Mountain and a lot of places around here, deer are the only large mammal. So if we see a hot spot it's hot enough that we think it's something living, we know it's a deer because everything else is too small for us to resolve in the thermal. There's other places where we work where there's also wild hogs and things, and that makes it quite a bit more complicated. We fly a lot lower there to try and be able to discern between the two. On their own, and female and juvenile deer will tend to be together in sometimes pretty large groups. I mean, I don't know what the largest group we've seen, but we've certainly seen groups upwards of 10 deer together at a time.
So how do you tell the difference between like a hot spot and like a road?
So yeah, I mean the roads are linear. What we have a lot of trouble with at Pilot Mountain are rocks, which especially when we fly in the evening, because they have warmed up in the sun during the day. Fortunately, this video is from the north side of the mountain, so it's not getting sunlight during the day. On the south side of the mountain, it's much more difficult to discern those things, so the morning footage ends up being a lot better for us because those rocks have cooled down to air temperature overnight. Into the physics of how thermal cameras work, but basically all materials do not emit thermal energy the same way. So for example, wood and water and rock, even if they're all the same temperature, will look in a thermal camera as if they are different temperatures because they emit different amounts of thermal energy depending on how warm they are, and that's a characteristic of the material. So even though pretty much all of this is the same temperature, rocks are looking warmer, things like water look warmer because they have very high what's called emissivity. But basically all of these spots, even though they're warm, are too small to be a deer. This is water appearing warm. The other thing is that in fact in the morning water is warmer than air temperature and is warm a longer time to heat up and cool down. So in the evening it's cooler than the background, in the morning it's warmer than the background. So there's kind of a lot going on that we have to consider, but I would say that is probably a deer in the center of the screen there, just based on its size. So now we're getting into a rockier. We flew within the park boundary, so we cut off everything that's outside of the purple line. But what this does, we're not imaging the entire park. At Pilot, we're getting about a 20% sample of the whole 4 square miles of the park. And that just allows us, if we see 100 deer and we've mapped 20%, then we just extrapolate that there's 500 deer in the park.
For the statistics that I guess go into that, and like how you extrapolate sort of multiplying around that, I guess. What are do you have an error rate, or is it just guesstimate?
Is not particularly healthy because when you get overpopulation, you get problems like malnutrition for the deer themselves, and then they also cause damage to the park itself. So they really change the structure of the forest. And to someone like Jared or I, when we walk into the forest at Pilot Mountain or somewhere like it, it's immediately apparent that there's an overabundance of deer because of the way the forest looks. And so, they've sort of qualitatively known all of this. And what this does is provides them a hard quantitative data about what the density of deer is, because we know what healthy deer populations, what kind of densities we should be seeing. So this gives them a very good quantitative estimate of how many deer are there, so that if they do need to do something like a herd reduction, they know how many deer they need to remove in order to have a healthy herd. And then there's other projects, like right now they're working to do some endangered native plant restorations, so things that they know used to be at Pilot Mountain that are not there anymore. And they know that if they do those introductions now, those plants will be immediately
do some really cool like
Yeah, that'd be great.
And then we'll, the northern half we fly from the other side. Which is a big enough sample that it lets us extrapolate how many deer are in the entire park. So we'll be flying over this area at about 400 feet above the ground.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to
All right. Let me have some sticks, please. I'll say 1, 2, 3, go.
Okay.
So you're going to rev up first?
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that.
Okay, go ahead and rev. 1, 2, 3, go.
So I'm at 15 meters. And so I'm going to go forward a little so I can get there we go. I guess the back, the back.
Yeah, come on. Just come on back over that way towards the mountain. That was great. That was a great shot. Okay. Go back out again. Go.
Going out.
It's really good.
Cool.
Let's go back out one more time. and
Sorry,
then-
I came up about 3 meters so I could see it behind that tree.
Yeah, good.
All right, going out.
Okay. There we go. Oh, that's a great shot.
South of us,
Mm, you're a brave
but
man.
we may land just in case.
I think we better land.
Yeah.
So
If you want to get
I want
footage
to
of
get you
me
landing, yeah.
landing, I'll.
You're gonna have
I'll
to
get-
move.
Clouds are terrible.
Yeah. Well, that's just.
Well, I got both of them together. Good flying, you guys.
This. No, grab my wrist. Yeah. Okay, now step onto one. My knee. No, with your foot. Put your foot on my top. Yeah. Okay. Now. Thank you. This is not a good idea. Wait, hold on. Yay.
Looks like it's coming a little bit closer now.
Yeah.
Be a good place for a timer.
It's advancing.
Down the mountain.
It's pretty much the edge of the forest as you follow it. Has the neighbors made any comments about the flying?
I don't think the neighbors know about it.
Really?
Have regular conflicts with the park, so I'm sure this would be.
I bet you would think it would be in their interest to know how many deer there are. You're probably
Right. Well,
munching on their.
they would love to be let in here to hunt.
I don't need to catch those down this place, but I can myself. Oh, look at the trees rising.
I would get that going out and then try to get the two together.
I'm getting myself a breeze over here.
No, look in the shot. Look in the shot.
Ready? You ready?
Yeah.
I have another one to work.
I don't know if it Max get that one too. Bob is not coming to view. I think
Okay.
that's probably your best bet.
Yeah, let's focus on it now. It's
So-
pretty small on the screen though, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah. So it's gonna come
Oh, it's coming in.
together. I would just
I'll just hold
stay
it. Yeah,
steady.
Yeah. Okay, I need his to get lower.
See, Bob
Also,
is
it's
trying
white.
to take pictures
I
of
see. Oh, it's
his.
going in.
As close copy as you can get it.
Yeah, sadly.
All right, just leave it.
It's only 1,500.
Just pan a little left. Just very slowly. Pan left. Just. Okay.
I think it's out of focus.
Just hold it steady. Yeah. Okay.
Is it out of focus?
Just leave it.
Okay. Yeah, it's just.
Bob is getting more aggressive. Keep that shot with those
the drones?
Yeah.
So right now.
I can't go. I have to run back there, and then the side will be delay. Is that?
So that's as wide as it gets?
Yeah. It's a 70 to 200.
Okay, let's go back.
Wait, hold on.
I guess we might. Yeah, that was the shot. That was good.
Okay.
Do like a explorer voice?
Whenever you're ready. It has to land on your face though, because I'm really tight.
Okay. Hello.
Wait, look up at the sky.
Pollock Mountain State Park. We're out here catching stink bugs, waiting for them to land.
Now I need a dramatic eye contact to the camera. Okay, do that one more time, but say stink bugs when you make eye contact.
Stink bugs. Stink bugs.